I planted this young apple tree just about a year ago. It's one of my Espalier fruit trees, and I'm going to train it to grow in the shape of a candelabra in front of this wall. A big part of training Espalier is the pruning, and that's what this video is about. 1 year's worth of pruning to grow an Espalier. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and I purchased this tree as a bare root whip, which means it really wasn't much more than a twig when I put it in the ground. And then I made the initial cuts. So let's go ahead and wind back the clock to almost a year ago to show you that process after I put it in the ground and began pruning. I want to espalier this apple tree in front of the wall of my garage. Now I am anticipating the future growth of this tree. I chose a semi-dwarf apple tree. The roots will get relatively extensive and they'll grow relatively large, but not as much as a standard apple tree. And that's important when you're planting close to the foundation of a building. Now, it looks nice being right up against the wall, and you can do that with a fence. But I've placed this about 12 inches away from the wall. That will give me opportunity to get in here, replace some of the siding, maybe paint at a future date, and not have to worry about removing this tree. I will have to set up a trellis system on either side of the tree to help shape and form the branches. But anticipating the size of this tree in the future, I'm okay with that. I want this espalier to be a candelabra shape, and I think the base should be at about 24 inches off the ground. So that's this point right here. I've measured it out, and this is where I'm going to make my first cut. Many espalier shapes involve horizontal branches, especially the candelabra. At that 24-inch point, I want the branches to be growing horizontally, and then I'll allow some vertical growth. If I don't make any cuts at all right now, this tree will continue to just grow vertically with some side branches. But by making a heading cut, cutting off this growing tip, I will stimulate the tree into growing branches. And the two branches that will come out just below that heading cut will become the future horizontal branches. Now, this is the hardest part of espalier, is taking a whip and making that first drastic cut. This tree already has a few of the leaves that have started to grow from the buds, and it makes it even more painful to have to cut some of these off. So I'll go down to that point that's about 2 feet off, and I want to check the buds to make sure that there is something at least looking alive below my heading cut. So this is the general area where I want to make my first cut. And as I look at the buds, I've got one on the back side here that will be growing into the house. I've got another right here that will be growing out. By coming down a little bit more, there's a bud right here that will start growing a little more to the horizontal, and a bud right here. So I think these two buds are the ones I'm going to focus on, because as they grow, it'll be really easy for them to maintain the direction. I don't like to try to bend the buds, or the branches I should say, and if I were to cut above this one, I would have to take this branch that's pointing backwards and then train it to go perpendicular to the trunk. But if I make a cut right here, the buds will already be pointed in the right direction. And I made a slightly angled cut. I've got the bud on this side, and so I'm cutting at an angle away from that bud. The idea being that, let's say it was raining, the rain would run off of where the bud is, not towards the bud. And that's it. That's the only pruning cut I'm going to make right now. I'm going to allow this tree to branch out, to set the leaves. I'll take care of it. But as far as additional pruning cuts, that's quite a ways into the future. Once the tree completely broke dormancy and the buds started growing, there were a lot of leaves that started growing and new branches spreading out. Over the course of the months of summer, the leaves developed, the branches grew, and the tree added almost 2 feet of height, all within a single year. And now it's time to prune this tree again to prepare it for this next summer. Right now, it's the very beginning of spring. And the ideal time to do this is in late winter or early spring while the tree is still dormant. I can see all of the limbs of the tree, and therefore I can identify which ones can stay and which ones need to come off. And because it's dormant, by making the pruning cuts now, how I stage those cuts will influence where new branches grow. That's exactly what happened a year ago. By making that first heading cut, I promoted the growth of new branches. So let's take a look to see just what those branches are. So that first cut I made was right here. And from that point, we've had 2 branches come out. And you can see this is how much growth we had just in last year. I also have 2 branches at the bottom here, one growing towards the house, one growing away, 2 branches that are growing straight towards these poles that I put in for trellising, and then a couple miscellaneous buds. So let me show you how I'm going to decide which ones stay and which ones go. So the key to most espaliers is to keep the branches in one plane. So between these 2 posts is where I want all of the branches to be growing. So this branch that's growing in that direction and this branch that's growing in this direction are ideal. They are exactly within the growing plane. But this branch right here that's growing outward is not. So I'll start by taking this branch off. And the same with this branch behind. It's growing towards the wall. It's not within the plane. So I'll go ahead and take this one off too. And so these bottom 2 branches are perfect. They're 12 inches above the ground. They're growing within this plane, and this will be the base of my candelabra. So as we move forward, I'll be training these branches to grow horizontally. And as they grow, then I'll train the tips up for the candelabra. Now I want a second set of branches for the candelabra as well. The big issue I have right now is that these 2 branches could easily be trained and establish that second horizontal layer. But my problem is that there's only about 6 inches separating these bottom branches and these top ones. And that's just not enough. I have to anticipate all of the growth in future years because these branches will end up getting to be pretty good size. And if I've got a big one down here and just 6 inches away, another big one, they're going to be too close. I won't have enough room for the fruiting spurs and the room to grow the apples, which is what it's all about. So now I have to be a little more creative and try to get another set of branches, just like this one, that will sprout up about 15 to 18 inches higher, which means one of these branches has to go completely, and the second branch will now become the vertical primary growing point. And when I make a heading cut again, it will stimulate some more side branches this year. So now this branch right here, again, is too close. I don't need it at all, so I'll do a thinning cut to take that out. Choosing between these 2, this was the nice vertical growth to begin with, and so this side branch is really too vertical. So let's go ahead and get in here and take this one down. And so now I have to figure out where I want the new growth to be stimulated, from these branches to where they're going to come out. And just like before, I'm looking at buds, and there's a couple buds right here. One's pointing in that direction, one's pointing in this direction. So let's hope that those are the ones that will give us some really good side growth this year. So I'm cutting off about a foot. So we had the 6 inches between the branches, and then the 1 foot, about 12 inches of growth from last year. And so if I can get some good lateral growth with branches this year, I'll have about 15 to 18 inches of separation. Now there are a few very small buds that are growing towards the front and towards the back, so I'll go ahead and take those off so that all the energy will be directed to the top of this tree, which is where I'm anticipating those new branches. And so we've had a whole year, and we've only made a handful of cuts between last year and this year, but now, especially with these 2 bottom branches, this tree is all set to start growing, and I can already imagine the candelabra. As I work on this tree, you can expect more videos, and when they come out, I'll not only link them at the end of this video, but also in the description below. For now, go ahead and continue on the path learning Espalier and pruning by looking at one of these videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.